Shalom, everybody. In today's video, I would like to speak briefly about Hebrew poetry. Recently, I acquired a very interesting and nice book that I am reading, and I would like eventually, slowly, to start making a series of videos about Hebrew poetry, but specifically Hebrew poetry from Muslim and Christian Spain. And this is the title of this book, The Dream of the Poem, Hebrew Poetry from Muslim and Christian Spain from 950 till 1492, which is the time of the expulsion. This is a book that contains uh, the major poets from Al-Andalus and from also the Christian territories, or Hebrew Jewish poets from this period, all Sephardic poets. This is a compilation of this poetry. It was translated, edited, and presented by Peter Cole. He's a scholar that decided to bring together this edition, see this book, with um, short biographies of the poets and also their poetry translated in English. In this book is not all of the poems that these poets wrote, but he brings a selection of some of these poems and translate them into English. So it is my desire that slowly start making a series of videos sharing with you a little bit about Hebrew poetry, the biography of who were these men, share a little bit of what he wrote about. And the reason for this is, like, as probably you know by now, this channel I would like to focus into bring the beauty of the culture and the legacy of the Sephardic Jews. And when I say Sephardic, not only the Jews from Spain and Portugal, the Iberian Peninsula, that's what Sephardic means, Sepharad, which means Spain, Portugal, but it includes as well the heritage of the Jews from all the Middle Eastern countries. These are called Sephardic Jews as well, because eventually the Jews from Spain and Portugal migrated to all these communities, and there were migrations back and forth during the time of Al-Andalus. This was the time of the Islamic Empire. So in the mind of the Sephardic Jews, the term Sephardic include all of these countries. And so too in the mind of the Muslim person, in their understanding, Muslim territories, not only the Middle East, but also Spain and Portugal, up to this very day, is in the mind and the conception of the Muslims. So too is in the mind and the conception of the Sephardic Jews to refer by this term Sephardic or Sepharadi to the Jews from Spain, Portugal, and eventually the Middle East as well. But in this book specifically, we'll encounter poets only from the Iberian Peninsula, meaning specific Sephardic poets. Although you will see that there's a lot of influence from other people who were born in, let's say, Morocco and eventually moved to Spain, and they were the ones who started to bring an influx of poetry. Specifically, we speak about Dunash ibn Labrat. We will speak who is this person and the importance of his changes and what he brought into the Hebrew letters. Now, why poetry? We have to understand something, that during the time of Al-Andalus, during the time of the what they call the golden age of Judaism, this is a period that took place in Muslim Spain. Specifically, started during the reign of the Caliph Abdurrahman III. He was the one who established the Caliphate of Cordoba. Oh, it was Khilafat Cordoba, they call it in Arabic. Abdurrahman himself, his father was Arabic, his mother was Spanish of Basque ancestry. He was the one who decided to change everything and to turn Al-Andalus from an emirate, Imarat Al-Andalus or Imarat Andalus, from an emirate to a totally independent caliphate from the Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad, Iraq. And with Abdurrahman III, things changed not only in terms of politics, but as well his approach towards others such as Jews and Christians. Because even though by the time of the Arabic presence in Spain, it's true that there were Jews and Christians living under Muslim rule, it was not like during the days of Abdurrahman III that he relaxed even more the status or the laws regarding dhimmis. Dhimmis are protected people. There is a concept in Islam that acknowledges Judaism and Christianity as revealed religions. So they call the Jews and the Christians Ahl al-Kitab, the people of the book, because they acknowledge the Torah and the New Testament, the Torah and the Injil as revelations from God, from Allah. So in the Muslim conception, they say, look, we're not gonna, if they don't want to become Muslim, we allow them to remain, to keep their faith. But if you want to live in our lands, you have to pay. You have to pay, it's not free. So there's something called dhimmi, people of protection, people are protected. This is a term that if you are a Jew or if you are a Christian, you don't like people to have this type of category on you, because basically you are a second-class citizen. In a Muslim society, you cannot hold official positions, you cannot be in a higher position than a Muslim, you cannot dress with the elegant clothes better than the Muslim. You always have to dress even in a certain way to show that you are a Jew or you are a Christian. You cannot ride a horse. There's a lot of limitations. The synagogues and the churches have to be lower than the height of the mosque, for example. There's a lot of things here. But if you don't have where to go, and in the case of Spain, Portugal, these were like Christian lands, and the Jews were living in Spain for thousands of years. There is evidence that the Jewish people live in Spain from the time of King Solomon. It is mentioned in the book of the Kings and the Chronicles regarding Solomon that used to send his ships every year to Tarshish. That's how it's called, Spain in those days, the Iberian Peninsula, to bring and to do commerce and to bring gold and a lot of exotic animals. There's a whole story with that. And we have archaeological evidence in Tortosa, for example, or in other cities of Spain that we have found graves of Jews and the inscriptions in Hebrew that date back to the 2nd century BCE, to the 2nd century of Common Era, and we have a few graves like that. Even there is a grave that was found, is the grave of Adoniram, the minister of King Solomon, and the grave is written like that. This is the grave of Adoniram, the minister of Shlomo HaMelech, that was sent to Spain by the king himself. And Rabbi Isaac Abarbanel, he writes in the 15th century, he writes about this grave. There's a lot of things here, a lot of archaeology. You can look into it. So the thing is that the Jewish presence has been there for a long, long time. But eventually, we know from history, there were a lot of persecution from the Christians. A lot of times, there were forced conversions during the Visigothic period. There was a lot of sometimes there were massacres to the Jewish community. Things were not that good to the Jews in that period that led to the conquest of the Iberian Peninsula by the Muslims, when in the year 711, Tariq ibn Ziyad landed in what is called today Gibraltar. Jebel Tariq, or Jebel Tariq is the name of the rock of Tariq. Gibraltar is how we call it today. And eventually he entered into what is Spain and Portugal, and we know the whole story with his also a commander, Musa, and eventually when there was a rebellion in Syria, and the enemies of the caliphate of the Umayyads, basically they massacred the whole family, and there was a prince who escaped from Syria. His name was Abdurrahman. Abdurrahman the first will be known later on in Al-Andalus. And that's why the time when they basically they massacred the whole family of the Umayyads, and they established a new caliphate, which is the Abbasid caliphate, the Abbasiyya. It's the son of Abbas. And they established this caliphate with the capital in Baghdad. And to establish the caliphate, you have to basically no, that's what happened. They just kill everybody of the previous dynasty, meaning the Umayyads. But the prince Abdurrahman, he escaped. He went to Egypt, eventually he went to North Africa there, and eventually he made it very, very far, so no one can catch him, and went to the farthest extremes of the empire, and that was Al-Andalus, in what is Spain and Portugal. And when he got there, they welcomed him, and eventually he did like we call it today, a coup d'etat, meaning he took over from the people there, and eventually they declare an emirate, Imarat al-Andalus, and basically they were still subjects to the Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad. So the Abbasids allow it to happen, but eventually things change. And that was during the time of Abdurrahman III, that he said, no more of an emirate, we want to establish a caliphate. And that's when he established the Caliphate of Cordoba, Al-Khilafat Cordoba. And so he established a caliphate independent from Baghdad. And you have at the same time in the Muslim world, two caliphates, two caliphs. And this is not a small thing, because in the ideology, the belief of the Muslims, the caliph is someone that is chosen by God. It's known as Amir al-Mu'minin, meaning the commander of the faithful. Amir, the prince of Mu'min, of the believer, meaning they appointed the successor of the Prophet Muhammad on earth. So we have that this new caliphate was established in Spain, or the Iberian Peninsula. There was no Spain as we know it today. There were many kingdoms: the kingdom of Leon, the kingdom of Castile, the kingdom of Aragon. There were many kingdoms. There were the Basque people in the north. So during this time, when the Muslims got into the Iberian Peninsula, basically the Jews felt relief from the oppression of the Christians, to the point that the Muslims appointed the Jews to safeguard the cities that they were conquering. So the Muslim army, they were conquering cities, and when they have to continue advancing to the north. So, but if they continue, who will keep what they just conquered? Meaning the Christian will come back and take over. So they appointed the Jews to safeguard their conquest, and there was some type of alliance between the Muslims and the Jews, so that allowed them to keep fighting to the north until eventually they were stopped and they have to retreat, and they solidify their conquest in the Iberian Peninsula. Anyways, to the point that we have that the emirate flourish, and with the caliphate even more. The Caliphate of Cordoba was so great that was really, some scholars say that even surpassed the Caliphate of Baghdad, because eventually the Caliphate of Baghdad declined. So Cordoba was on the rise. We have Cordoba was the most developed city in that part of Europe. They had libraries, they had doctors, physicians, philosophers. They attracted the greatest minds. Even the people that were persecuted by the Abbasids, they went to Cordoba, searching and looking for a new life, a new beginning. Either Muslim, Christians, Jews, a lot of people, because the Jews from all the parts of the Muslim world, they migrated to Spain, and you have all this movement of people. And Cordoba was, like I mentioned, a city that had drains, and they have light on the streets, and they have libraries. They had the biggest library in Europe at that time, hospitals, schools, public service. That have an army, they have police, they have the strongest navy, in the opinion of some, the strongest navy in the world at that time. They built mosque, the famous mosque of Cordoba. So to the point that they were teachers, and women also had a high status in Cordoba. You have that there were women that were teachers, doctors, there were physicians, even people who were like scribes of the Quran and other books. Even women were copying holy books, and women had such a high level. They were librarians, doctors, physicians, women at that during those days. So you see here that for the first time, we have to say that the laws of dhimmis, according to the Sharia, the Islamic law, it's not, it was not fixed, but each country allows certain things, and were changes and here and there. But for the first time during the time of Abdurrahman III, the Caliph, he relaxed even more the laws of the dhimmis, and there was this openness towards Christians and Jews, to the point that culture flourished, and everybody was going to Cordoba. The scholars, the Christian scholars, Muslims, Jews, everybody was going to Cordoba to learn at the great academies and schools. The Jews had synagogues, and they have yeshivot, schools of learning, and there was a huge, big boom of knowledge and scientific discoveries, and a lot of development that was taking place. At the same time, things got relaxed so much, meaning openness, from the side of the Caliph, that this is what scholars call the beginning of the golden age in Al-Andalus, or Jewish golden age, because there were changes that were taking place during these days. I myself, as a historian, have done research at the university on the history of Al-Andalus, the history of Sepharad, as how it is known in Judaism, and on the culture and the mystics, and there were a lot of great improvements and developments that took place. And I myself, I've been able to do research and to look into the manuscript and to look at the original documents. I had the honor to visit, of course, Spain many times. I have family there. My family originally also, many centuries ago, comes from Granada, and other parts of Spain. And I myself, I've been to Cordoba, and I've seen the remains of the palaces and the splendor, and the mosque of Cordoba, a beautiful building with the architecture, and it's really, really mesmerizing. So even today, you can see, if you visit Andalusia, the splendor of the time during the time of the Arabs in Spain, in Portugal. You have the Alhambra in Granada, in Grenada. So specifically, going back in history now, specifically during the time of Abdurrahman III, things started to change. And there was a man in the Jewish community that he was the key figure that started to change everything for the Jewish community. His name was Hasdai ibn Shaprut. Hasdai ibn Shaprut, if you go to Cordoba, there's a street with his name. Hasdai ibn Shaprut was a brilliant physician. He was also a philosopher. Some people say he was a rabbi. He was an astronomer. It was really brilliant. He knew Arabic. He knew Romance language, meaning some type of Spanish of those days. He knew Latin, Greek. He really brilliant. But he was very famous because he was as a doctor. His fame was so great that he did some type of discovery, some type of medicine, that his fame reached the ears of the Caliph Abdurrahman. So they called him to the court, and he got a position as a royal physician to the caliph. Now, Hasdai bin Shaprut, as I said before, was really brilliant person, a lot of knowledge, very smart, a lot of learning, to the point that he excelled and he really impressed the caliph, and the caliph decided to name him his wazir or his vizier, meaning the second to the kingdom. And specifically, he was appointed as the one supervising all the I think it's called the commerce, or but the maritime um, imports and exports, everything that was coming in and out of Al-Andalus. Imagine his position. It was had a lot of power and a lot of influence. And eventually, he wanted as well for the Jewish people to gain independence from the Jewish academies in Babylon, in Iraq. Now, this was also in the interest of the caliph, because in those days, you have to understand that the rulers also finance culture, philosophy, science, art, religion, and they wanted to have the most developed country in those days, and that included even their subjects. They wanted to have the best, even if they allow Christians and Jews to be part of their kingdom. They wanted to have, even among the Jews, the top of the top, and the Christian the top of the top of the scholars. So Rabbi Hasdai ibn Shaprut, he started to finance, in the opinion of some scholars, his own personal court among the Jews, meaning he started to attract poets, philosophers, rabbis, thinkers, doctors. He started to finance and to bring the greatest minds of the Jewish world in those days. And of course, the caliph himself supported this idea, because again, he wanted to have the best of his subjects. So you have that there were Jews coming from many parts of the Islamic world, from Iraq, from the Holy Land, from Egypt, from all over. Everybody was going to Cordoba to learn. We have records of people from Europe, from Christian Europe, not the Iberian Peninsula, not Spain and Portugal. We're talking about France, Germany, from other parts of Europe, that they were going all the way to Andalusia, to Cordoba, to learn and to be trained as physicians, philosophers, and to learn from the wisdom, because that was the most developed city in those days in all of Europe, Cordoba. So in the Jewish world, Hasdai ibn Shaprut was financed. He was very wealthy. He was born into a wealthy family. It's not that he became rich because he was the physician for the caliph. No. His family was already rich. He was born into a wealthy family. Scholars, really very, very important family, and aristocratic family, you could say. So he started financing people. He started bringing poets and physicians and rabbis and thinkers and philosophers, because in those days, not like today, meaning a rabbi in those days was not only a rabbi. Today, a rabbi is someone who knows the law here and there. No, in those days, a rabbi was also a scientist. He knew philosophy. He knew poetry. Poetry was the top of the top. Poetry was something of the high souls. That's why in those days, most of the people that consider themselves of intellectual elite, you had to know poetry. If you don't know poetry, you are like basically an amaret, like we say in Hebrew. You're a fool. Poetry was a level of the softness of the soul. So the intellectuals in those days, the Christian, Muslim, Jews, everybody, they had this connection with poetry, with philosophy, with the science. And they were also rabbis and imams and whatever in the different communities. So you have all of this intellectual elite that was coming to Cordoba. And at the same time that Abdurrahman III wanted to get independence from the Caliphate of Baghdad, from the Abbasiyya, from the Abbasids, so too the Jewish community wanted to get independence from the rabbis of Baghdad. from the academies of Babylon, Surah, Pumbedita, these people. He wanted to be a part. We are now the elite, and yet we find that they were successful. Successfully, the Jewish community from Spain, from Al-Andalus, there was not Spain, Al-Andalus, they successfully got independence from the academies of Babylon. And there's a whole story how this happened. It took some time, of course. Hazai ben Shaprut, it took him 50 years to really start creating all this boom of intellectuals, Jewish intellectuals. And there's a story how there were students from the Babylonian academies, from Surah Pompedita, that we don't know if this really happened for sure or it's a legend. It seems that it actually happened. From history, we have records that says that there were 3 rabbis that were kidnapped by pirates in those days, and eventually they brought them close to Al-Andalus, close to Spain, Sepharad. When I say Al-Andalus, when I say Sepharad, we're talking about the Iberian Peninsula. Al-Andalus is how Spain, Portugal, the Iberian Peninsula was called by the Muslim, and Sepharad is how it was called by the Jews. Sepharad is a name that comes from the Bible. It's written in the book of one of the prophets, the prophet Obadiah, that speaks about the exiles of the royal people, of the Jewish people from Jerusalem, that they are exiled in Sepharad, meaning in the Iberian Peninsula. That after the destruction of the temple, they took them and they were exiled, the royalty of the Jews in Spain. That's why Sephardic Jews always saw themselves as very special descendants from the royalty, not from any Jew, but from the royal families, the Davidic line from Jerusalem. They took them to Spain, to the Iberian Peninsula, and the Sephardim saw themselves a very high lineage. So anyways, so you know when I say Al-Andalus, Sepharad, Iberian Peninsula, Spain, we're talking about the same place. So anyways, you find that it was during this time that the golden age of Spanish or Sephardic Jewry started, during the time of Abdurrahman III, the Caliph, and Hasdai ibn Shaprut. And looking specifically into poetry, as I said, poetry was the for the elite, for the intellectuals. They something to find comfort for the soul. Is a poet is someone who is in the very, very high level spiritually. So as I show you, I have here this book that I bought recently, and even though I'm familiar with the poetry of the great poets of during this period, we have Shlomo ibn Gabirol, or Jabirul, Suleiman ibn Jabirul, they call him in Arabic, Yehuda Alevi, Shmuel Nagid, Ibn Nagrila, Abraham and Moshe ibn Esra, among others. There are many poets. Slowly we will start making a series of videos on each of these poets, and we share some of their poetry in English, and perhaps try to interpret and bring a little bit of the biography, who these people were, because again, a lot of these people, not only they were poets, they were also rabbis, scholars, philosophers, doctors, and I really want to resurrect, I want to bring the culture in those days. This is a world that even the Jews today is like they are not even familiar with this. Sephardic Jews don't even know their history, which is very sad. And you will realize that a lot of their names, they're all Arabized names. Of course, because the Jews in those days, they spoke Arabic. They dressed, they spoke, the culture, everything was Arabic. We call them, we say Jewish. Jewish is the religion, or genetically speaking. But in reality, their culture, their thinking, everything is in Arabic, like Middle Eastern people. And we have great minds and rabbis like Maimonides, Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon, and many others. But specifically, we're going to look into poetry, because I believe poetry has been considered by the mystics as one of the high virtues that allows a person to get closer to God. A poet is someone who has a very soft and very special pure and refined soul and an intellect. So the poetry is what brings or could bring a person closer to the Almighty, to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So it's my desire that while I share this poetry and share a little bit of the biographies of these great poets and rabbis, Jewish rabbis and poets from Al-Andalus, it is my desire as well to spread awareness and knowledge about the rich and beautiful legacy of the Jews from the Iberian Peninsula during this period. Specifically, like I said, is Hebrew poetry from Muslim and Christian Spain from 950 to 1492, which is the year of the expulsion. I want to share a little bit about more details about why it's so significant. During those days, the Hebrew language was only maintained among the elite, meaning among the rabbis, the scholars. The common people did not speak Hebrew. They just spoke the language in the country they live, meaning if they live in Arabic countries, they spoke Arabic. If they live in Spain, they spoke Romance or Latin or Italian or Russian or French or whatever language they spoke in the country they live. But it was in Spain for the first time that the Jewish people, the scholars, especially the poets, because it was through the poetry that they start looking into Hebrew grammar and they start reviving the Hebrew letters and really extracting the depth and the beauty of the Hebrew language. It happened in Spain, not in Babylon, not in Sura, not in Pumbedita, not in Germany, not in France. It happened in Spain, and it started during this period, during the reign of Abdurrahman III with Hasdai ibn Shaprut, and it's series for the next 500 years. You have generation of poets, and it was through poetry that they were able to do this. Because to write a poem is not just to write something. No, there are rules and there's grammar and syntax and rhymes, and you have to really decode and look deep into the grammar. And the Hebrew poets were able to do this basing their own learning on the Arabic equivalent. Meaning, before the Jews, before the Hebrews, the Arabs were the ones who, for the first time, look into the grammar to such a level that, in the opinion of some scholars, has not been matched in history. It was through the deep learning of the Quran that they look into every single word, and the Arabic become more standard, because also the Arabic that expanded was the Arabic of the Quran. There were other types of Arabic before the Quran, but the Quran was the one that brought the beauty of the Arabic language. And therefore, even though there were great Arabic poets even before Islam, but after, you find that there was a boom of the language. And eventually, to really decode and to understand more their holy book, the Quran, they start looking into the letters and the grammar and this and that. And eventually, they were great grammarians within the Arabic world. And when we say Arabic, we have to be careful with this, because in reality, you find that most of the scholars, the top, were actually Persian. But we say Arabic, Muslim, but in reality, we're talking about that time. But most of the top scholars in all science, in all disciplines, and everything were the Persians. Not to say that there were native Arabic people that were reached high levels, but in general, in all the sciences and everything, were Persians. But anyways, they use Arabic language. That's what I'm trying to say. The Arabic language is what they develop, and they created dictionaries for the first time, where the Arabs, with the study of the language and the grammar, they created dictionaries to explain the language. And that's why the Arabic language flourished so much and got so rich. In Arabic, there are many, like I think sometimes like hundreds of terms to describe one thing, for example, and equivalence for words, for example, for love, There are different words for love, and it's unbelievable. So, anyways, the Jewish people saw this, and they said, we want to do the same with the Hebrew language, because the Hebrew language is poor. This is what Rabbi Yehuda Levi, he writes this in the Kuzari, because he knows what I'm explaining. There were a lot of critics show, look, there was a lot of also fighting between religions, look, this and that. And this is one of the proof of the in the Muslim understanding, this is the superiority of their culture and religion and language, to show, look how the greatness of the Arabic language. So Rabbi Yehuda Alevi writes in the Kuzari, it's true the Hebrew is poor because we stopped speaking Hebrew for hundreds of years, so it became impoverished, meaning it's only old archaic language from 3,000 years ago. But because people did not speak the language did not add new vocabulary, did not expand. But it was for the first time in history during this period that in Spain, in Al-Andalus, that the Jewish scholars, poets specifically, start looking, and from the model how it was done with the Arabic language, they start doing with the Hebrew language. And they start creating dictionaries of the Hebrew language. And because poetry requires to choose precise words and these and letters, and so they start looking, and the poets, they were the one that contributes so much to the flourishing of the Hebrew language. And that's why you have the greatest grammarians in those days, Rabbi Barami Ben Ezra, Menachem Sarruq, Yehuda Halebi. All of these great scholars were also rabbis. They were poets, and because of their poetry, they were the ones who created the boom of the Hebrew language. But they copy from the model of the Arabs. And now I want to speak a little bit more in details about names. I just mentioned a few names, but let's look specifically how this happened. We just mentioned that Abdurrahman III became the caliph. We have a Jew, Hasdai ibn Shabrut, became the right hand almost to the caliph, and started attracting a lot of scholars and poets. So it was because of this, he was such a wealthy person that he had his own personal poet. In those days, if you were a wealthy person, it's something of status to have your own personal physician, your own personal philosopher, your own personal poet. And people, it was a job in those days to be even today, but in those days more, uh, to be a philosopher, to be a doctor, to be a poet, you really put a lot of effort, because you live because of that. You write you write poems for rich people, and they pay you for that. So you find wealthy patrons that will support and encourage your learning. And so, anyways, Rabbi Hasdai ibn Shabrut, he had his own personal poet, and his name was Menachem Sarruq. Menachem Sarruq was born in Tortosa. Tortosa, city that did not bring was not a lot of success there, to the point that eventually he moved to the south, to Cordoba. And it seems that Yitzhak was the father of Hasdai ibn Shabrut, and he was the one that was supporting Menachem ibn Ben Sarruq. And Menachem went to Andalusia, to Cordoba, to learn philology. And it seems that Hasdai's father was the one, giving him money, helping him with learning. It was close to the family. Eventually, we know that Menachem went back to his city, started a business, and then by the time that Hasdai's parents died, we know that Menachem ibn Sarruq, he wrote like poems, eulogies, hesped, and all these things, because of he was close to this family. And eventually Hasdai, when he got appointed to the court of the caliph, he come back to Cordoba. He called Menachem, come back, I need you. Not only you're going to be my personal poet, you're going to be my personal secretary. And we find that Hasdai ibn Shabrut was a very was very powerful man in those days. Menahem ibn Sarruq, he was the one who actually um, was the person, like I just said, was the personal copyist, meaning his secretary, of the official letters that Hasdai had to send to other kingdoms and delegation, etc. And Menahem was the one who probably wrote the letters that Ibn Shaprut sent to the king of the Khazars, Jewish kingdom that was established for a short time in the Caspian Mountains, in the Caspian Sea, in that area. So it's a kingdom that was short-lived because eventually they were defeated by there was a lot of fighting with the Muslims. Eventually they got defeated, but Hasdai bin Shaprut sent letters to this Jewish kingdom, and Menahem probably was the one who wrote the letters because this was official copyist, and also to the queen of the Byzantine Empire, Queen Helena. Hasdai sent a letter to the queen, ask him to treat the Jews well and to ask him for a lot of favors towards the Jewish community. So you can see the power and influence that Hasdai ibn Shaprut from Al-Andalus was able to influence all the way back to Byzantium. Byzantium, or was it what is today Turkey? Istanbul was known as Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire. It was a Christian land. Until the Turks conquered everything, they took everything, they changed the name, and then they named the land Turkey. It was not called Turkey, it was Byzantium, the part of the Roman Empire. Anyways, he called Menahem ibn Sarruq, and it seems that Ibn Shaprut did not get that well along with Menahem. Menahem was in good terms with Ibn Shaprut's parents, but did not gain that much favor from Hasdai. So things change when a new poet came to Al-Andalus. His name was Dunash ibn Labrat. Dunash is a Berber name. We don't know if he has some type of Berber ancestry. He was a Jew. They were Berber Jews. And Dunash, even though he was from North Africa, I think he was from Tunisia. I don't remember, but I think Tunisia. Dunash actually was living in Babylon, in Baghdad. He was a student of Sa'adiya Gaon, Rabbi Sa'adiya, or Sa'id ben Yosef al-Fayumi. Sa'adiya Gaon was the top Jewish rabbi in the world in those days. He was the Gaon. He was the leader of the Jewish people in all the world. The center of the Jewish world was in those days in Iraq, has been for centuries. So Sa'adiya Gaon, he was from Al-Fayum. He's in Egypt. He was Egyptian, but eventually he was invited to go to Iraq, and he was offered the position of Gaon. So Rabbi Sa'adiya Gaon, he was a genius. He was not only a rabbi, he was a philosopher, he was a doctor. He wrote. He was the one who wrote for the first time a translation of the Torah, and not the Torah, the whole Tanakh, the Bible, into Arabic for the Jews of those lands who spoke Arabic. He wrote about mysticism. Genius. He knew Greek philosophy. Anyways, Rabbi Sa'adiya Gaon, among his students, was Dunash ibn Labrat. And Dunash ibn Labrat, learning from his teacher, Rabbi Sa'adiya Gaon, Rabbi Sa'adiya Gaon wanted to bring the flourishing of the Hebrew, because he wrote that he was very sad that the Jews have forgotten the holy tongue. Look at this. We need to be familiar with the language to get closer to the Torah and to the heritage of our fathers. So Rabbi Sa'adiya Gaon was very distressed. And what happened? He composed certain books on grammar and Hebrew language and poetry as well. He said the Jewish people will learn these books and they will speak the holy tongue and they will sing these as poems with musical instruments, and they will get back to the language of the Torah to hold and preserve this heritage. And Rabbi Sa'adiya Gaon started to incorporate also a little bit of Arabic grammar and structure into the Hebrew meaning in the way to compose, the style of writing, the style to write, the rhyme, the prose, this type of literary, are not innovation, but literary styles, let's call it that way. So that way he realized that there were a lot of things lacking within the Jewish culture, a lot of things on philosophy, sciences, and he started bringing all these things in. He had a lot of knowledge, science, philosophy, many things, poetry. Now his student, Dunash Ibn Labrat, went even further. And he was the one who decided to copy the style of the Arabic poets and the style of writing poetry in Arabic, and the grammar and the syntax and all of this, and to adapt that style into Hebrew. To the point that he showed it to his to his rabbi. He in the commentary, Rabbi Saadia was like, okay, this is something interesting, but no one knew at that time what would actually be eventually, to what extent the new innovations or ideas of Dunash ibn Larat will bring into the Hebrew language, to the point that Dunash ibn Larat, he wrote the following. He said like this. He said, let scripture be your Eden, meaning the Torah, be your garden of Eden, he wrote. And the Arabs' books, your paradise grove. Meaning, he said, you have to learn a lot. And you have to understand something. It's not like the Jews were, let's say, let's just copy things from the Arab. No, it's just that they themselves, they spoke Arabic, their culture was Arabic, they were from the Middle East, from the Holy Land. They were Jews living all over here in the Holy Land. So in Egypt, in all the Arabic countries. So they were also people from these countries. They felt part of this culture. So you learn and study the science and the philosophy and the letters and whatever it is in the countries you live. So you are one of those people, of the people on the land. You are not something separate or foreign. No, you are there from here, from the Middle East. So they learn from the brilliant minds in those days. God willing, I'll make a series of other videos on the Jewish philosophers during those days as well. They are known and acknowledged as some of the top philosophers in the Muslim world, but they were Jewish in those days. I will make some videos about Rabbi Saadia Gaon, Abu Barakat al-Baghdadi, and many other ones. So you have that Dunaj ibn Labrat. It seems that he got invited by Hasdai ibn Shaprut to come to Cordoba. And when he got to Cordoba, Menahem ibn Sarruq, who was until now the poet, things got complicated because Menahem was Iberian, and by this time he was writing the first Hebrew lexicon dictionary of the Hebrew language. This is something unique in history. The first one who wrote a dictionary. Rabbi Saadia also wrote, but to the level and perfection, Menahem ben Sarruq was the one. To the point that even Rashi and the Tosafot were using later on his dictionary when they were writing the commentaries on the Torah. Well, the thing is that Menahem ben Sarruq, he was working on his masterpiece, the dictionary of lexical terms of the Hebrew language. Now, even though he was a poet, Menahem ben Sarruq, he refused to use the Arabic style. He said, I want to keep the Hebrew style, which is the Eastern style. And there were different styles of Hebrew poetry, which is more in tune to the biblical, just very, very old style. That's not the way it was written. Poetry was composed in those days. He said, I want to keep this. And even when he wrote his dictionary, it seems that even though he got some type of influence of Arabic and the Arabic style and the way of to analyze the words and the lexicon and all this, he did not acknowledge this. But we know that he refused to incorporate any foreign element. And that's the style also of poetry, in which you hold strong to the Eastern style of Hebrew writing, poetry, and you reject everything that is foreign. And this is the style of, he was writing his dictionary. because he said we want to keep pure things the way they should supposed to be. Now things change completely for Menachem ben Zarruq when Dunash ben Labrat show up in Cordoba. He was finished. Because when Dunash ben Labrat came to Cordoba, he mocked and he laughed at the dictionary that Menachem was writing. And he wrote by that time, by that moment. He said that the book is full of errors and full of mistakes, and precisely because he refused to look into the Arabic grammar that is similar to Hebrew, because they are Semitic language like Hebrew, Arabic, Aramaic, because he refused to look into the Arabic language to help to study the Hebrew language, because come from the same family. So by studying Arabic, you can learn a lot about Hebrew. But because of this, he refused to do. So Dunash ben Labrat, he laughed. He said, "There's a lot of mistake here." Basically, he destroyed Menachem ben Zarruq. Look, even more. Somehow, the enemies of Menachem ben Zarruq, I don't know what happened, what type of calumny, what type of accusation they sent against him. It seems that he was accused. I don't know if it's true or false. I don't know what happened, but it seems that he was accused of being a heretic, some type of follower of the Karaite Judaism. Is a sect within Judaism, to the point that people spoke these things to the ears of Hasdai ben Shaprut. And Hasdai ben Shaprut was not only the in the court of the caliph. Hasdai ben Shaprut was appointed the Nasi of the Jewish community by the caliph, meaning the government had the power to appoint the leader of the Jewish people. And the leader of the Jewish people in the Iberian Peninsula was Hasdai ibn Shaprut. He was the Nasi, the prince, the president of the Jewish community. And they said these things to him about Menachem ben Zarruq, that he seems that he was a heretic or some type of Karaite. Maybe it's false. It seems probably was false or some type of. You have to understand there were fightings in those days between poets and between philosophers and people, because that's how it was. That's how it was. So they created this accusation to the point that Hasdai bin Shaprut sent the officials to take Menachem ben Zarruq and to put him in prison. And not only they took him out of his house and they beat him and they dragged him and they humiliated publicly, but they did it even on the Shabbat, on the Sabbath. And the Sabbath day, the officials went to his house and they took him out of his house, they beat him and they dragged him on the street and they put him in jail. And it's really moving moment, because in jail, Menachem ben Zarruq, he writes poetry to Hasdai ben Shaprut, in which he complains all the horrible things that happened to him. So he wrote this poem. I want to read it for you. He said, this is a verse from the poem. He says, "It is you for whom I long, you for whom I shed my tears." No, he's asking. He said, "You for whom I long, for whom I shed my tears, you for whom my soul pours out, to whom my heart submits. I weep for the violence done to me. For my sentence the tears stream down, and for this perversion of justice my bones give away." So it seems also that there was some type of conflict already between Hasdai ben Shaprut and Menachem ben Zarruq. It seems that Hasdai was not that impressed with his poetry. It seems that Hasdai promised to pay him some money and he never got that money. And there was some, in those days, the poets also wrote poetry attacking attacking people. There was already some type of problem between Hasdai ben Shaprut and Menachem ben Zarruq, to the point that when they said something about him, immediately Hasdai ben Shaprut took him, put him in jail. We don't know how long he was there. It seemed he got sick, and in short time he died. He passed away. We don't know if he died in jail or after he was released, but in couple of short time he actually died. We don't know if it was because of his condition in jail or what happened, but he did not live long after these incidents. And now the new poet was Dunash Ben Labrat. He was the one that he introduced in to the Jewish community all the knowledge from the academies in Babylon. As I mentioned before, I was telling the story that there was a point in which three rabbis were kidnapped by pirates, and eventually they were ransomed by the Jewish community. Two of them were ransomed. One of them went to Italy, I think, or to North Africa, but two of them went to Spain, Rabbi Hananel, and there was another rabbi. And these were rabbis from the academies in Babylon, and these were the ones who started the great yeshivot and Jewish academies of learning in the Iberian Peninsula. And now you have this great poet Dunash Ben Labrat that introduced the style of Arabic poetry, Arabic prose into Hebrew poetry, meaning that he wrote poetry in Hebrew but in the Arabic style. And we have that the first really Iberian poet, Menachem ben Sarruq, although listen to his surname, Ibn Sarruq, which is clearly telling you that he's already Arabized name. There's a great Muslim scholar, Ahmed Sarruq, from North Africa as well. So you can see that the surname of Menahem is also Arabic style. We'll make a video on each of these poets, specifically about their lives and biographies. But anyways, Dunash Ben Labrat was the one who was really became known as the father of Hebrew poetry, the father of really the Andalusian poetry, or the father of Hebrew letters, even for some people, because in the next generation, the third generation of poets, for the next 500 years, you have a boom of poetry, and poets like the level of Shlomo ibn Gabirol, Yehuda Alevi, as I mentioned, Yehuda Hanagid, Ibn Nagrila, all of these poets were the one who resurrected the Hebrew language and wrote commentaries on the Torah, and they produced dictionaries and grammar and philosophy and all the sciences. But it was thanks to the contribution of the poets, because the poetry were the ones who looked into the Hebrew grammar and lexicon, and all started with Dunash Ben Labrat. Let's see what else can I share. Let me tell you something. This eventually things got complicated, let's call it that way, in Al-Andalus. The caliphate was defeated. It came to an end. You have the kingdoms of Taifa. There were different Muslim rulers in different parts. They divided the territory, and then you have invasions from the Al-Murabitun and Al-Muwahidun, the Almoravids and the Almohads, that they were extremists. They call it extremist Muslims, and basically it was during this period that they destroyed the Jewish presence in Andalusia. That's the time when Maimonides had to run away and flee for his life. He was still a young kid when he ran away. So the real golden age, it was during the time of the Caliphate of Cordoba. After that, things got worse. The Jews, again, the Jewish community disappeared. By the time of 1492, when the Christians conquered Granada, there were no Jews left. In a lot of the cities, there were no Jewish people. The Muslims in those that later came later on, they were intolerant. They massacred the Jewish community of Granada. Thousands of people dead, and they just wipe out the whole communities. They were like fanatical, intolerant, extremist Muslims that they just wipe out the Jewish community. And the Jews from Andalusia, they had to flee. They went to the north, and that's another second period of poetry that we're going to study. Then all the knowledge from Andalusia, they went all the way to the north, to the Christian kingdoms. And there is a second generation of poets that will speak about them as well, that developed with all the knowledge that they took from the south, from Andalusia, to the north, to the Christian kingdoms, and to southern France, to the Provence, because the Provence in southern France belonged in those days to the kingdom of Navarra, or the kingdom of Leon. Therefore, it was part of Spain, or the Iberian Peninsula. So it's not really France, it's southern, basically part of Spain, northern Spain. So anyways, the second wave of poets that they were actually the inheritors of all the legacy from Al-Andalus, that they went to Christian territories because they were running away looking for new life. And the communities of the south were wiped out during the time of the Almoravids and the Almohads. And the Jews had to flee, like I said, to northern Christian kingdoms. They went to France. A lot of them went even to England. You have Rabbi Abraham ibn Ezra. He was in the north, but he was he inherited the legacy from Al-Andalus, and you find him going from place to place, to Italy, to even to England, like I said. A lot of Jews went to North Africa. Others came to the Holy Land, like Maimonides and his family. A lot of them had to pretend to become Muslims to save their life and eventually go back to Judaism. A lot of horrible things happened in those days. And that was the end of the great time in in the Iberian Peninsula, and specifically, like I said, in Al-Andalus, the Golden Age. So it's not like people think that during the time of Muslim Spain, the almost 800 years that the Muslims were in Spain, it's not like people think that 800 years the Jews, Muslims, and Christians were living happily, like paradise, convivencia. No, it was only in short periods of time here and there, and most of the time it was just horrible persecution, massacres. It was specifically, it was in this short time, 150 years of the Caliphate of Cordoba. There was this boom, but the other rulers came and they conquer and they kill other Muslims because for example, the Almoravids and the Almohads, they came and they say, look, these people in Al-Andalus, these people are not Muslim, they're heretics. And they came and they brought what they thought was the real Islam, with more extreme. When they saw all these Jewish people and Christian people in the court of the Caliph with such a political position, how could this be? It's not allowed. So they said these people are heretics. Yeah, whatever. So you have all of this, it's part of the history. So it's not like people think that in Andalusia there was these 800 years of peace and loving each other. No, most of the time it was not like that. It was only short periods of time, couple of years here, a couple of years there. Some years during the time of the Caliphate, that's probably the most important part, like 150 years or so that was the Caliphate. But in reality, it was not easy though in those days. But that's part of history. It's not just something for another video. Now we're looking into specifically into the poetry. I just want to mention briefly some of the names, and with this we will finish this video. I want to mention some of the names of the poets that, God willing, there's no rush here. Maybe during this year and the next couple of years, I don't know how long it will take me to make videos about all of these poets, because as you can see, this is a very thick book. And not only I want to share poetry, I want to speak about them. I want to speak about the culture of the Jewish people in those days. I want to revive the heritage of the Sephardim in those days. So I want to mention a few of the names of the poets. First of all, again, in this book, you have the poets from Muslim Spain and you have the poets of the second generation from Christian Spain. So the period of Muslim Spain that this poetry is covered, it goes from approximately 950 to till 1140, and you have poets such as Dunash ben Labrat, Ishaq ibn Marshaul, Yosef ibn Abitor, Ishaq ibn Khalfun, Shmuel Nagid. You have Yosef ibn Hasdai, Shlomo ibn Gabirol, Ishaq ibn Givat, Yosef ibn Sahal, Levi ibn al-Taba'an, Bahya ibn Baquda, Moshe ibn Esra, Yosef ibn Sadiq, Shlomo ibn Tzadkiel, Yehuda Halevi. Now, part 2, Jewish poets under Christian rule and the Provence between 1140 until 1492. You have Abraham ibn Ezra, Yitzhak ibn Ezra, Yosef Qimhi, Yosef ibn Zabara, Anatoli bar Yosef, Yehuda ibn Shabbatai, Yehuda al-Harisi, Yaqub ben el-Azar, Abraham ibn Hasdai, Meir Halabi Abu al-Afiyah, Yitzhak Hasniri, Meshulam de Piera, Moshe ben Nahmanidis, Shem Tov ibn Falqira, Yitzhak ibn Sahula, Abraham Abu al-Afiyah, Abraham ben Shmuel, Yosef Hikatila o Jikatila o Hikatiya, Todros Abu al-Afiyah, Nahum, Abraham Abedershi, Yitzhak Agorni, Yedaya Hapenini, Avner of Burgos, Kalonimos ben Kalonimos, Yitzhak Polgar, Shem Tov Ardutiel, also known as Santov de Carrión, Shmuel ibn Sasson, Moshe Natan, Shlomo de Piera, Vital ben Beniste, Shlomo Halevi, known as Pablo de Santa Maria, Shlomo ben Bonafed, Yitzhak Aladab, Moshe Remos, Eli ben Yosef, Moshe ibn Habib, or Moshe ben Habib, Saadia ibn Danan. These are few. Again, these are, in this book, you have a collection of what the author considered the most significant Hebrew poets. You have hundreds and hundreds of names that people didn't hear about them, or they were not at the level of these poets. Don't think these are the only Hebrew poets. No, there were hundreds or thousands of poets during that time, centuries of great minds and great scholars in those days. But here we have a selection of the most famous ones, but there are many other ones. So God willing, the next video I want that we speak about this topic. I would like to start with a little bit of the poetry of Menachem ben Sarruq and who he was, his life, his students, what more details, sharing a few of his poems. Yeah, we have a very interesting story because we just spoke how when Dunash ben Labrat came, basically Ibn Sarruq was destroyed. He was finished, but I mean he fell favor in the eyes of Hasdai ibn Shaprut. But Dunash ben Labrat also fell out of favor in the eyes of Hasdai ben Shaprut to the point that they exile him. And there's a heartbroken poem in a letter that he wrote because he had to he left behind a young wife and a newborn baby, and his wife also wrote poetry. It's an amazing story here, and this is the beauty that I want to bring back. It's not that I want to only bring about poetry. I want to bring and resurrect and to share awareness of the rich legacy of the Jewish people. What was the topics they wrote about? They wrote about many things. They wrote about life. They wrote about love. They wrote about divine connection. They wrote about their yearning for Zion, for Jerusalem, for the condition of the Jewish people. They wrote about sadness. They wrote about things that happened to them. There are poets that even wrote about secular topics, even about erotic things. Rabbis that were poets, they wrote about in erotic language. But that was the style in those days. That was a world that is gone. It's the time of Al-Andalus, Sepharad. The Sepharad in those days is a different world that the conception and that we have in the Jewish world of that generation. It's the totally different people in a different time, to the point that to speak about Sepharad or to speak about Al-Andalus has become some type of mythical land, mythical paradise that is lost, a period of greatness and science and art and poetry and philosophers and convivencia, to the point that it becomes kind of mythical. So God willing, I want to start slowly, start making a few videos about sharing this poetry and analyzing the poets and sharing historical context, because as I mentioned before, I am a historian and I have specialized in the history and the culture of Al-Andalus. I've been there. My family come from there. A branch of my family comes from there. I have family right now living in Spain. So as a scholar, I study this history. I know the history. I specialize as well in the three monotheistic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. So I know what I'm talking about. Plus, I am fascinated. I love it because I feel that I'm part of that legacy, direct descendant of these people from Spain, from Al-Andalus. My family comes from here, from Granada, from Cordoba, from Seville, Ishbilia. So for me, this is something very personal, very special. I constantly in my learning, in my studies, I am always thinking about this period of time. It's like for me, it's like I live in the 13th century, in the 10th century, in Al-Andalus, and this is my. Not only I learn about the great Jewish sages and thinkers, I study about the great mystics and philosophers, all from that period of time. So for me, it's something very special to speak about Al-Andalus, to speak about Sepharad. It's something close to my heart, and I want to share about this. I think you don't find people speaking about these things. Even the Jews today, sadly, are ignorant about their great and rich legacy. They only hear the name, oh, the Golden Age, but they don't know anything. And especially this topic, poetry, that is so important for someone who wants to get closer to God, to the Almighty. Poetry is something that develops and purifies the heart. Poetry is the expression of the neshama, the soul that yearns to be connected with the Almighty. So everybody knew in those days, the mystics, even the Sufis, for example, in the mystics of Islam, in the Kabbalah, the mystics of Judaism, in all the traditions, that poetry is an expression of the soul, is a refined aspect of the soul. So God willing, Besat Hashem, that I want to share about this and bring awareness of the Jewish culture and the Sephardic legacy of these great poets and rabbis and physicians and doctors, and to bring awareness and to make the Jewish people proud of their heritage, and to make the Sephardic Jews proud of their heritage, and so they know as well the rich and great legacy that they have, and to be proud of such a great legacy of ancestors and um, amazing and refined souls in those days. Bezrat Hashem, Siyata Dishmaya, that God give me the zechut, the merit to share and to speak about history and poetry and to bring a richness of the culture of the Jewish people during those days. Bezrat Hashem, praying for this project to be successful, sending you blessings and greetings from the holy city of Jerusalem. May the Almighty bless you. God willing. Bezrat Hashem. Shalom.